So I've gathered my things that I need to be able to make my lining slip pocket panel with the little trim at the top. So I've got my pattern piece here, which is the lining, it says here lining main panel slip pocket, cut 2 lining fabric and 2 woven interfacing, and then there's an option here. So what I've done to prepare my pieces, I have used the same fabrics for the exterior of the pocket and for the back of the pocket. I've interfaced these with a lightweight woven interfacing, which I actually used, it's like an SF101, so just a lightweight. And then what I've done to adhere these together is I've used a product called Heat and Bond, or you can use any kind of double-sided fusible webbing and adhere those together. So this just gives me one piece of material to deal with instead of trying to control 2 pieces of fabric and not letting them slip and that. So everything's cut. The important thing is here, this top edge of the pocket. So when you look at the pattern piece here, you'll see that the pocket is wider at the top and narrower at the bottom. So we're going to be applying our trim to this top edge. So this is our trim here. I'm using a faux leather with a beautiful stunning shimmer. So this will be folded over in half and sit across the top of the slip pocket. I'm also going to be dividing this pocket into 2. So in the middle I will mark my center line, and at the top I'm going to add a decorative rivet. And you can use any size rivet that you like. I'm using a rivet that's 8mm by 6mm. The 8mm is the width of the cap of the top of the rivet, and the 6mm is the size of the little post on the rivet, because I only need a short post. It's not a thick material that I'm riveting through. So I'll show you a look at the size of the rivet. So that's the little cap of the rivet, and that's the little post, this little section here, that's what's called the post of the rivet. So I'll be adding one of those in the middle as a little decorative element. The other piece that I need is one of my lining main panels. So I've got, in my pattern piece, I've got a lining main panel front and back, cut 2 lining fabrics and 2 woven interfacing. And for these ones here, I've even got placement marks on the pattern piece, so where this slip pocket, once you've prepared this, you'll be able to line that up on the little notches that you can mark on your pattern piece, so they'll sort of sit on top there like that. So for the lining fabric, I'm using the same fabric, same coordinating fabric, and that's my lining piece, and I've applied a layer of medium weight woven fusible interfacing, and so I need that. I'm using also a air erasable marking pen. This is the Soline brand. Great little pen, really love this one here, and it will just disappear from the fabric. I'm also going to be using double-sided tape. I'll get the brand that I like here. This one here I really love. As you can see, it's been well used. It's got some leather and that sitting on the outside. It doesn't usually look like that. It's usually nice and clear. This has been the best double-sided tape I have ever used. It's a Japanese brand, and it is, if I get that up nice and close there, you might be able to see that brand there. Kikuchi, I'm not sure how you'd pronounce that there, but you can also just get this from Sewers Delight here in Australia. They're at Browns Plains, and their website is sewersdelight.com.au, and yeah, it's available there as well. So fantastic double-sided tape, and you can tear it. Tears beautiful, so don't need to have scissors or anything there, and the strongest double-sided tape I've ever used. So highly recommend it. If you don't like using double-sided tape, you can also use a glue stick or your favorite sort of form of adhesive that you like to use with your sewing machine. And I'm also going to be needing a ruler because we'll be marking some placement guidelines on our slip pocket trim. This is absolutely stunning, this faux leather. This also is available at sewersdelight.com.au, and it's got this absolutely beautiful shimmer frost. Not sure if you can capture that there in the light, but it is stunning. And this fabric also, this is a Japanese cotton, and it's called the grunge. It's like the collection is called grunge, and it's got a really pretty sort of light pink and a little bit darker pink and a grey, and I just thought it matched really nice with this faux leather for the lining of this bag. Yeah, so that's what I'm using to make this slip pocket. So once you've gathered all your supplies together, we'll get ready and I will show you how to make it. So in this section here, what I'm going to do before I even attempt sewing my pocket trim onto my pocket piece, I'm going to do a test stitch. I've just got a little scrap sample of the vinyl, and I've got my needle threaded. I'm using a size 16 needle. So this is the needle here that I'm using in my machine. So yeah, size 16 needle. Because I'm using vinyl, generally whenever I'm using vinyl materials I like a size 16 needle. And the thread I'm using is this one here. I'll just grab it off the thread spool here just so you can see which one it is. So I'm using a Resant thread, and it's a 75 or Tex 40, and just I'm using sort of like a neutral sort of cream off-white colour. So that's the one I've got here. This thread here I've also got from Sewers Delight. So the website there is sewersdelight.com.au, and they're in Browns Plains in sunny Queensland where I live, and I also do some work there and I teach classes there. So I've got my little sample fabric there, and I'm just going to do some test stitches just to see what length I like, because this is like a top stitch that I'm doing. So I might set my stitch length to a 3.5. I generally find if I do a test stitch, a 3.5 length is a good length to start with, and then I can either go up or down from there. It's my sort of starting base stitch. So I'm just going to do a few stitches here and see how it sews. I could also change my foot over to a Teflon foot, but I think with this material it might be quite good. So I'll just snip these threads here off, and we can have a closer look at that stitch length. Actually, it's quite nice, that stitch length. I might just see what it looks like on a stitch length of 4. Give that one a go. I've just got my narrow toe foot on my machine at the moment, and this is just a straight stitch machine. Not a special walking foot or anything like that. I'm not being fussy about, you know, keeping the edges even or anything there. Trim these threads and we'll have a look. So this was my stitch length here of 3.5, and this is my stitch length here of 4. Looking at that, I actually quite like the stitch length of 4, so I think for my top stitching on this project I will stick with a stitch length of 4. Another little tip that I can share is, so you don't forget what stitches, stitch lengths and that you're using when you're doing a project, have a little notepad or something there beside you so that you can keep track. You can even put a little post-it note on your machine just as a little reminder. Now this I've cut a little bit longer than the width of the top of the pocket, and I've cut it at 1 inch high. When you look closely here, you'll see that the edge of this section here is really nice and smooth. When I turn this over, you can see it's like, I'm hoping you can see, it's a little bit fuzzy. So all I did to make this really nice and crisp, to remove the fuzziness of the backing of the fabric, is I get my cigarette lighter, and when you light your cigarette, you've got your yellow flame and the blue flame section here. The blue flame is the hottest section, and if you use that section to sort of singe the ends here, you won't be left with any of those little black chalky charred marks on your materials. And I'm just going to run it along the very edge of this material here, and it will just help. I'm not sure if you can see how effective that is. I'll see if I can do it nice and close for you. So here you can see it's nice and smooth. Here you can probably see there's some little fuzzy edges there. So I'm just using that blue section, and I'm just quickly running it along the back of the faux leather. And it'll just take away any of those little fuzzies. And give me a nice crisp edge, because I'm not doing any edge coating or anything on this faux leather. There we go. Really nice and smooth. Nice sharp crisp edges. So now I'm going to mark right along the width of this strip at a 1/2 inch, because I want to make a line across the center of the pocket. So I'll use my vanishing pencil or air erasing pencil. I don't need it there for long term or anything there. So on my ruler, I'm just going to find my 1/2 inch mark there, and I will go along and make that little mark. I want this really nice and straight, because I don't want my pocket trim to be crooked in any way. So the little black lines that I'm following here, I've got them just sitting up to, but not on top of that pocket trim. So just sitting up to it, just getting that nice and straight. I can do little sections at a time, and I'm using my pen, and I'm coming in really nice and close to that ruler. As well, if I sort of mark with my pen on a lean like that, my line will be further away from the ruler. And I'm just going right along to the edge here. Now I've got a nice little line there. So I think you can see that one there, clearly visible. I could use a friction pen as well if I liked, but I quite like the little air erasable pen. So I'll get them out of the road. Now this is where you can use either double-sided tape, or you can use an adhesive if you like. If you find that double-sided tape tends to gum up your needle, what you can do is when you apply the double-sided tape, apply it so that it's not going to be in an area where your needle is going to be landing. So that, I find that really helpful. But I don't find on my machine it really affects my machine too much, and if I do get some adhesive on my needle, I can just use my fingernail and scrape it off. So I'm applying this tape here. I like to apply a piece of double-sided tape to both sides, because what I'm going to be doing is adhering this trim to both sides of the slip pocket, so it'll end up being adhered on both sides. This tape here, there, you can see I can just easily tear it. Just give that tape a really nice press down so it's nice and secure. Applying some on my other side. You can see the little black fuzzy little bits of the leather that are on my roller tape here. So they're nice and secure. Now, if you've got a front or a back, or whichever side there you like, you can determine which one you want to do. The ultimate aim is at the front of this slip pocket trim, you want to be a little bit higher than what it will be at the back, so that when you fold this over and then you top stitch it, you know that you're going to be catching the trim at the back. So if you see there, if I fold it over, I'd be able to see that trim at the back. To achieve that look, what I'm going to do on one side here, I'll remove this tape here. So if I want to ensure, what I can do is whichever side I thought was going to be the front of my pocket, I'm not sure which side here I'll have as my front. They're both pretty. It's the same fabric. I might actually do this side here as my front of my pocket. So what I'm going to do, I'll just bring this over a little bit here. Oh, fingers are sticking. Is I'm going to line this up so that I'm just lined up to, but not over, that line I just made. So I want to be able to just see that line right along there. So if I hold that up there, you can see I can just see the top of that line. Now, when I fold this piece over, I'll remove that double-sided tape so I can secure it down in place. I tend to start in the center, and I'm just going to bring it over towards the front or the back, whichever side is the side that you're coming to, and I just work my way along. You can see there that just stays down really nicely. And then before I stitch it, I will double check it also. I like to do it a little bit longer so that I've got these little tails at the beginning and the end. Now the other thing that I also like to do, you can see that's adhered there on both sides, a little bit lower down at the back. Turn that around there, so it's actually a little bit wider at the back than it is on the front. I like to give this a press as well with some form of a roller or a brayer, just to get that really nice and flat and a nice crisp edge along that fold line. Just helps make a difference there. See those edges there, really nice, flat, straight. So now when I look at that, I think I'm ready to do my top stitching. Just getting my threads there out of the way. The other thing about having these little tails at the beginning and the end is it helps give my foot something to sort of start climbing up to, just that slight little bit of extra thickness there. On this narrow foot, to keep this nice and straight, my stitching line, I'm just going to use the edge of my foot and run it along the edge of this fold over, the raw edge of this overlay on my presser foot, on my pocket I should say. I might do a couple of little back stitches there just to secure those stitches in place, because the last thing you want is your threads coming loose and being seen. So I'm onto my pocket and I'm just going to do a little lock stitch. One stitch backwards and forwards I find is really good, because then I know that locking stitch is inside my seam allowance. And I'll just stitch along. I'm coming up to the edge here, and I will do another locking stitch here at the end. Just at the edge of the pocket, lock stitch, and then I can just stitch off the end. And then I can trim these threads here, and we'll have a look at how that looks. So there's our pocket trim, stitch down, all nice and straight. Looks really pretty. Did we catch the back side? We well and truly caught the back edge there as well. If you wanted to, you could add another row of top stitching along the edge here, just as a decorative element. I'm just having a think whether I might like to do that as well. These are little design features. It's your bag, so you can do whatever sort of little details you like. I think I'm quite happy with that. I'm going to be putting a rivet in the center here, and this has a nice crisp edge there. You can probably get a bit of a gauge there just by the sound. It's nice and crisp, like even when I try pressing on it, yeah, it's got a nice crisp edge. But adhering those two pieces of lining fabrics together makes it so much easier to do this. There's no basting of anything there, it's all ready to go. So now all I need to do is I get my lining piece. So this is the lining panel that I'm going to stitch this pocket to, and I want to center this in the middle of the pattern here. I've got little markings already made on my piece of material here, my lining. I've got little marks where to line up the top edge of the slip pocket. So that makes lining up everything really nice and easy, and I know my pocket's going to be straight because all I have to do is line those up like that. Now, to make sure that this is centered as well, so I want my pocket centered across the bottom here. I might just move the camera down a little bit for you so you can see a bit more. So across the bottom here, I want to make a center mark, which is on my pattern piece, and I haven't done it yet. So that, like, even just lining this up, I know that that's centered, but I want to also mark my center mark along the bottom here for two reasons. It makes it easier for me to work out where the middle is to do my stitching to divide this pocket. Plus two, then when I add the base of the bottom piece of my panel here to the bottom of the pocket, at the bottom of the bag piece, the bag bottom, I'll be able to easily center that as well. So I'm just going to grab my pattern piece. I can mark this on the top here because I want to be able to see this marking on the top of the pattern. So I've just centered my pattern piece and I've got a little mark here. I'll move it up just slightly, enough there so I can make that mark. So for this mark, I'm not going to use a vanishing pencil because it might disappear before I actually get to sew it. So I'm just making a little mark there. So I've got my center guide. And on my lining piece, I will also mark the center here as well, because I will have it there ready then when I sew this to the bottom of the bag. So that's done. So now I can lay this down, and there I'm just lining up those edges. Just move you back a little bit more so you can see. Hoping you can see what I'm doing. So I could clip this if I liked, have that clipped in place, or I could place a pin, whichever you find easier to do. Got some clips here handy. What I'm going to do is I'm going to clip just underneath there, because I'll be putting my presser foot on this section here, and I will turn this around and I'll add a little clip here, going there, lining up on that notch, just up to it there, so I can still see that notch, but I'm just sitting right on it there. And everything's nice and centered. There's my center mark there. If I turn over, I can see my center mark there, so they're nicely centered. And all I need to do now is baste this in place. So for my basting stitch, I'm starting on top of that piece of trim, and then I'm not sort of starting before it because I don't want to risk pushing this pocket panel down and taking it offline, like I know I'm already straight. So I'll just put my foot down onto the trim, and then I'll do a little locking stitch, a couple of stitches there, just lock that in place. And I'm basting about 1/8 of an inch away from the raw edge. Seam allowance on this piece here has a 1/2 inch seam allowance when we go to sew it into the bag. So I'm just basting that in place. I'll turn around and I can baste across here, or what I can do is take that out, just trim those little threads. I can come around to this edge here and I can lock this in place so that I know that that's going to stay straight. I've got enough room here in the bed of my machine. I can actually baste this from this edge here. Remove that clip, put my foot down, do a couple of little locking stitches, and I'm just going to come all the way down to that bottom edge. And that's in place. So no matter what I do now, that pocket we know is nice and straight right across there. So it's already starting to look quite pretty. Now I've got my center mark here. I know this is nice and straight because I've got my markings here, and my trim is sitting right where it should be. So this is a nice straight edge and this is a nice straight edge. I can now just get my ruler. I don't have to fold or crease anything. Just get my ruler, lay it down flat. If I line up one of the lines on my ruler across here or across here, that should be nice and straight. So that's straight there. I can slide over and come over to the the little marking that I made for the center of the pocket. Get this nice and straight. That looks pretty good to me. Double check it. Oh, moved it. Line up there. Line up there. And that's beautiful and straight. So this time I'm going to use my air erasing pen, and I can just make a little mark straight through the center there. So now my slip pocket has a dividing mark there. Put my ruler and my pattern piece away there, move them to the side. So when I top stitch here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this is optional, you can stitch from the bottom and come up and then turn around and come straight back, or I can stitch a little bit to this side of the line, about 1/8 of an inch, stitch across and come back down 1/8 of an inch on the other side of the line, and then I've got 2 rows of stitching. And then I can place my rivet in the center here. Don't take the stitching up past where you did your top stitching on the trim, because if we go past this top stitching line and we stitch up here, when we put a rivet in the middle, we will actually be cutting through the stitching, the thread, and then our thread could unravel. So we only want to go either up to that line or come up to it, 1 stitch across and come back down. So let's go. And what I'm going to do this time, I'm going to stitch across the bottom edge here, come up to here, go up, down and come across. My sides are already in place, everything's laying nice and flat. And I'm going to do roughly about 1/8 of an inch away from the edge. Remember, I've got a 1/2 inch seam allowance there, so these stitches won't be seen. When I get roughly about 1 stitch away from this marking here, I shall, let me just have a look, how far away am I? Maybe 1 more stitch. There we go. The edge of my foot now is going to run along the edge of this line. Now I'm coming up to where the top of this trim is, so I can either just go to the bottom of that trim, which I might just go to the bottom, pivot, come across, say 2 stitches, and then I'll come back down, and the edge of my foot is really close to this line that I made. A locking stitch. Didn't need to, could have just kept going, and now I'm coming across and I'm closing up the bottom of the pocket. And now my panel has 2 lovely little slip pockets in it with the nice trim on top, and they're nice and strong there. The stitching here is nice and strong, so I will now punch a hole for my rivet here. That's my little doggy in the background barking. I'll just pause the video. Ah, she stopped. So I can make a mark if I like on this top panel here. There's my little line there, so that's my center, and I can place a little mark there where my rivet can sit nicely in the center. So I'll go and punch a hole, and I'll be back. I thought I'd just show you, look, I went and got my hole punch here. So what I can do to get into there, like I've only got this much room here. I've got my hole set at a size 2, is what I'll do is I'm just going to roll this fabric up just so that it's got no risk of getting caught and accidentally punching a hole where I don't want my hole. So now I can get in here. Let me just get this back down. Roll that out of the way nicely. Wasn't holding onto it properly. So I've got my hole punch. I've already got my little mark made there, and I just line that up in the middle and I can punch my hole. Give that a good squeeze and a little wriggle, and that will make the hole. So you can probably see there now I've got a nice little hole made. We can grab our rivet. I've got my rivets here. Now I'll show you another thing that I like to do on the back of the rivet, just to help prevent the rivet slipping through or tearing the fabric. This fabric has already been stabilized with a heavier woven interfacing, but what I can do as an additional security is I can add a small piece of stabilizer on the back. I'll just grab some, won't be a second. Okay, back again. So I've got just a very small little piece of what's called Decorative light. It's really nice and thin, so, and really super strong, like I can't tear that at all. So I can just punch a hole in here. You can use any other form of ideally a non-woven stabilizer, something that's got a little bit of strength and hasn't got a risk of sort of tearing or shredding apart. So I can just slip that straight over the back of that rivet, and then there's the little cap of the opposite side of the rivet. If that cap is, the post is too long, I can add a little bit of bulk in here, so I could put some fleece or a little bit of foam there just to give that a bit more thickness. But I'm now going to secure that in place with the rivet. If you want to see how I do that, I'll go and grab a rivet press and show you a look. Okay, so back again. So here you can see this is my rivet press. So it's a cam snap rivet press, and I've got a specific die in here for rivets, and the same as here. So all I need to do now to set that rivet in place is I can, got my rivet at the back there, I will secure it into the base of the die so it's locked in place, and then with my handle here I can just come down and give that a firm press, and there's my rivet nice and secure. And on the back there now you can see I've got a rivet that's nice and secure as well, and no risk of that coming out. It also adds extra strength at the top of that slip pocket. So there's our little slip pocket with the decorative trim, nice and firm pocket, great sizes here on my handbag there, so I can get my hand right in my handbag there. They're great for holding our phones, so when my hubby and I are out together, I've got one and he's got one for his stuff as well. So, but this one here is specifically in my handbag pattern, which will be being published very soon. I'm actually teaching a class on this at the moment in person, so the ladies that are in my class are also testing the pattern for me. So stay tuned, but you can do this on any slip pocket. I just thought I'd give you a detailed overview on how to make a really pretty little slip pocket. It's gorgeous. Okay then, I shall see you in the next video. Thanks for joining me.